Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Anna Rosenberg, and today we'll talk about public speaking confidence with a twist, with our guest, Taylor Trusty, the CEO of a 10-year-old digital agency focused on designing award-winning websites, branding, digital marketing solutions, and custom applications in an effort to help established organizations put their best digital foot forward. Taylor is also an accomplished speaker himself. And here's the twist. That gives us the opportunity to explore public speaking confidence from the branding and marketing perspective through the experience of someone who doesn't teach it but lives it. Welcome to the show, Taylor.
Thank you for having me.
You know, the main conversation of this show is confidence. I'm curious, what is confidence to you and for you?
So I think that confidence comes from a couple of different places. I say this oftentimes at work, that the only way to get better at something is to continue doing it. You know, the only way to get better is to do it. So doing is really all that matters in getting better. And I think that there's this big difference between kind of arrogance and confidence, and too often they get overlapped, if you will. But arrogance is not listening anymore. You know, you're not learning anymore. You're just, you think you've got it all figured out and everybody's there to listen. Whereas I see confidence as really, you're at a good spot in terms of speaking or in terms of leading or in terms of selling or in terms of doing and building. But there's also that degree of learning. So you continue to learn. And that to me is what's important. It's the confidence is you feel good about standing up in front of a group and speaking or launching and building something. But also, you know, at the end that there are things that you could have done better or the team could have done better, because you always can. And you're learning during the process and then immediately after.
That's a beautiful definition of confidence, like connected with learning, because it opens up to a lot of possibility, right? Like we can always learn and do better. Like, what do you feel are the biggest misconceptions about public speaking confidence?
That the people who are really good were always really good. You know, back to what I was saying, it's just like great bands or great musicians or a great jazz artist or a great football player, great baseball player. Sure, some of them as a kid were amazingly good, but for the most part, it was just a lot of work and it was a lot of, repetition and a lot of I screwed up there. So it's part of that continuous learning process. So I think that not just with speaking, but with a lot of things, we're too quick to give up. And I think that part of that is this celebration of this concept of an overnight success that largely isn't true. Most overnight successes are 10-year successes. And when we glorify this idea of somebody went from nothing to, a great speaker in 4 weeks, or, a great football player was born that way or what have you, I think it does a big disservice to everyone who worked a lot to get to the point, which is most people that are very, very good at what they do. And then even more than that, it does a big disservice to kids and to individuals. So let's say it's the first time that you're in front of a group and it's your first time speaking in public. And when you get up there and it doesn't go well because it's your first time, that's not going to. So if all you hear are these stories of overnight success, then you may think to yourself, I'm not cut out for this. I'm not meant to do this. I can't do this. And then you give up. And so I think that's a big disservice. I think the reality is that the vast majority of, and there's data to back this up, the vast majority of people who are very, very good at what they do got there through repetition, through continuous improvement, and through kind of deliberate practice, as Gladwell speaks to. And I firmly believe in that.
Yeah, like I also feel that this some people are born public speakers myth. It's like a disservice. What is the biggest obstacle to build confidence as a public speaker?
Well, I think it depends on the person. So for some people, it's that inner voice. It's that voice that comes from childhood, or it could be the voice that also drives you to get better, but it's that voice that says that you're not good enough, that speech wasn't good enough, and that you'll never be good enough. And so I back to the disservice. I think that oftentimes we tell ourselves these things that really aren't helpful or valuable to ourselves. And so I think that could be a real struggle. I kind of keep going back to this point, but when we think about public speaking, and I've been very fortunate in that I've spoken at flying to a conference in 2 weeks, and speaking there, and I'm very fortunate in that people come up afterwards and they say very, very kind things. But for every one of those talks, there are many, from a few years ago that really weren't great. As a matter of fact, I spoke at an entrepreneurship event probably 3 weeks ago, and I have spoken at this particular event. So it's like a cohort of incoming entrepreneurs. I've spoken at this event for the last 4 or 5 years. And it's a small group, 50 to 60 people. And as part of this cohort, there's a group of mentors that are at the back of the room. So I gave my an hour-long talk about marketing and entrepreneurship and things like that. And then at the end, I finished and I was getting ready to leave, and several of the mentors came up and they said, "Hey, I just want to let you know, that was really great. And on top of that, like, you could tell you really hit your stride, and they said great things, and it made me feel very, very good. But the reality is that if you had watched my talk 3 years ago or 4 years ago, you wouldn't have said those things. You would have said, okay, yeah, that was good. But no one was coming up and with that praise. And so I think it's important to stick with it. So if it's something that's important to you, it's to keep doing it. And then at some point, people start to say, oh, you must be pretty good at that.
Thank you for that. Because, it's rare that people actually talk about the process of developing something, right? Like, we are in a culture that goes to the end result. And we want everything fast and today and now and instant. And so it's kind of interesting to see how you saw the process and how you lived through the process. Would you say that perfectionism is like a pitfall when we are trying to develop confidence?
I do think so. So I think this idea of perfectionism can be a driver. So it can be something that's advantageous in a process like this, or it can very much be a negative. So the negative side would be, I think, comes in a couple of ways. One, if you're unwilling to try. So if you're like, you know what, this isn't good enough, and I'm not even going to try, then perfectionism, served. It gave you no benefit there. But I think it can be a positive if you use that as a drive to continue to get better. So if it's like, you know what, that was good, but I really want to be great at that. So let's find ways to make that better. I think that it can be advantageous. So there are kind of two sides of the equation, and if you use it as a negative, it'll be a negative. If you use it as a positive, I think it could be a positive.
Talking about drives, what inspired you to create the business that you have and help and work with the people that you serve?
What has been the drive to create the business and to help people? So I knew since I was a kid that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I was a very poor student. I did not listen well. I was not great with authority. I was never good with, having to listen to someone or an entity or a structure, just because I was told to. I'm very much in the idea of, if you're going to teach me something, then you should have done it, right? So if you're going to teach me about business or about marketing or about any of those things, then what was your experience doing those things? And if you don't have experience, I'm not listening to you. And so that can be good in some ways, but in school, that's a terrible way of being. And so I could not leave school soon enough. I wanted to drop out of high school. And then my mom did not let me. And then I eventually dropped out of college after a couple semesters. So I think I was fortunate in that my mother is an entrepreneur, and I knew from a young age that that's what I wanted to do. So it just kind of felt natural from a young age. Today, today it's different, right? So today I have a team of people. We have 2 offices. Have clients all over the country and now the world. So it's kind of a different story. Today it's not really about me, right? I've traditionally been the face of the company. The first 8 or 9 years of the company that was really seen as like me and then a group of people. And now we're really pushing for the firm to be seen as an entity all on its own that doesn't need me. And so for that to happen, then I've had to change my approach. So that means helping others inside the company grow. So if you want to be a professor, then by all means, I should help you be a professor. There's a great book that talks about this called Dream Manager. And I very much believe in what they talk about in the book, which is that, asking, and we do this at Blackstone, asking individuals what your dream is. So if your dream is to be a firefighter, and that's what you want to do, and right now you're a copywriter, then really my job in life should be to help you be a firefighter, even if that doesn't serve the benefit of me as Taylor or as the company as Blackstone. And so I believe in that. So even if like what you want out of life and what the company wants out of you don't overlap, I think that the individual's wants override that of the company. And so it's been something that had to work on a lot. And our COO, Rebecca, has, very much believes in team first. And that's something that, she believes in organizational health, and we have a lot of conversations about these things. So that's been an evolution, from a leadership perspective on my side.
What is one lesson about confidence that you learned early on and that still impacts you today?
Well, so there have been a number of them. So the company that I run is a digital creative agency. It's building websites, marketing, branding, and there have been a number of occasions, especially in the first, let's say, 2 to 3 years, that I got kind of kicked in the teeth, right? And so I started this company when I was very young. So I was 20, and I shouldn't say no one, but a lot of people didn't want to buy from me because they saw me as being so young, and which was fine. That just made me work a little harder. There was one time in particular. So I was this company called. They sold, what's it called? They sold like water things online for marine equipment. They sold it in a store, and they wanted to sell them online. So they had a website. The website wasn't very good. They wanted to sell online. So I went and met with the owner and his right-hand person in their store. I'm in the store. I'm asking some questions. He comes out and he tells me, he says, look, the guy who built my current website, I would have continue working with me because he's a good friend, but unfortunately he's in jail right now. And because he's in jail, he can't help me build the website. And that was the first 5 minutes of the conversation. And I thought, okay, this is going to go well. So then I said, okay, so what would you like to do? And he's like, well, we want to sell more online outside of just this store, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, okay. I said, well, to do that, you're competing against some big boys, so you're going to need to spend some money. And he said, well, how much? And then I said, well, at a minimum, $25,000. And at the time, and this was probably 5 or 6 years ago, at the time, $25K was a really large project for us. It's like that was a bold ask of me, because my average ask was probably 5 to 15,000. So I was really kind of pushing myself outside the comfort zone. So I said 25,000. And then this guy flips his lid. He freaks out. He says, how in the world could anyone pay $25,000 for a website? I don't get. And then he asked me to leave the store. He says, he walks me out and he says, that's enough. And I was so flabbergasted at how upset he got. He started yelling. And I really didn't understand it. And the struggle with that is that kind of scarred me in a way, right? Like I was pushing the envelope in terms of confidence, in terms of like, here's a big ask. I'm going to try it out. And then it really failed. The irony of the situation is he said, I could imagine maybe Toyota spending $25,000, but I could not imagine any other, like unless you're a Fortune 100 company. And then the irony of the situation is that 5 years later, Toyota did become a client of ours. But that was I think that was a powerful moment because it really shook me up. Like that really, it seems kind of inconsequential, but it shook me up because it made asking for $25,000 the next time more difficult, because I had that memory of, well, last time I did this, it went very, very poorly. And that exact same thing can happen in public speaking. And it has happened to me many times where I was like, I really blew that. For every one that somebody comes up and says very, very kind things, there have been several that, I walk off the stage and think, that wasn't that great.
That was an incredibly generous story because, again, right, like the quote-unquote inspirational stories we hear a lot are all about success, right? And I asked for the 25,000 and they gave me the 25,000 because I asked, right?
Right.
So how did you approach the next person? Like, with that thought in your mind that maybe the next person would also say no. How did you, if you wish, recover from that?
So part of that is, and I do this in sales a lot, that there's just this, my mind goes into dissection mode. So my mind goes into, okay, what went well there? What went poorly? And then how can I do differently next time? And so in that scenario, when I started to dive into the facts, I realized that he was an anomaly, right? He was not that. And I think there's a big lesson here that I learned, which was that he's not my target client. So the opinions of people who are not going to buy from me are not valuable. And I think that this is, I was listening to a number of interviews. NPR is this great podcast, How I Built This, and they were talking about they were interviewing entrepreneurs. And when you listen to them, there's this mindset. I can't remember who it was, but there's one I was listening to yesterday, and she said the most dangerous person that you can ask about your company is your mother and your friends, because they have the best interests at heart. But the reality is that they think that they're helping you by saying things like, that'll never work, you should just stop and get a job. And they'll give you opinions on things that they shouldn't be giving opinions on. And so this guy was the same way. So that the guy that owned this marine shop, he wasn't a good customer for me. I should have never even gone. I shouldn't have gone to his shop. But it took that experience for me to realize that he wasn't a good customer. Again, in the same way that if you ask your mother, Mom, would you buy this? and then she says no, that can be really deflating because you have a lot of confidence in your mother. But the reality is that your mother's not the target customer, right? So she doesn't buy $50,000 websites. So her opinion, frankly, isn't all that valuable. And I know that that's kind of hard to hear for a lot of people. But it's something that's outrageously important. And in business, it's understanding who's the buyer, who's our customer, who buys from me, who's most happy when they buy from us. And then it's kind of ignoring everyone else. And so that was a big part of it. So as part of that dissection process, I realized those things. And then I started to more finely tune who those great customers are. And today, what that has led to, if you fast forward several years, is that if you call or if you email and you say you're interested in working with us, there's this, it's a two-way screening process, right? So we ask a list of 24 questions before we agree to work together even on a bid. And because, whoever it is that marine owner, he had a list of questions in his head. So why should we not have the same? This is a two-way street. And so there were a lot of very, very valuable lessons that came out of that. But to directly answer your question, the next time it was $25,000. I don't remember specifically who it was. But I started moving my way up a ladder. This is in a business coach talks about, where he's like, you have a ladder of asks. So if the biggest ask that you've ever made in your life was $25,000, then maybe next time the biggest ask should be $35,000, should be $50,000, should be $75,000. And then you go up it like a ladder. Because the first time that you sell a $100,000 project, it's like, holy cow, that was amazing, right? You're nervous, you're really freaking out. But now that's the high mark on the ladder, 100K. So everything that's 100K or below, next time, you've got it. And so I started to use that mindset. So even though, yes, he said no to the 25,000, I just kept asking to the right customers. And then eventually somebody says yes to 40K. And when that happens, then asking for 25,000 is much easier because you've already done it at a higher degree.
That makes a lot of sense, and that also shows why you are so successful at what you do. What are your favorite speakers in our generation, and who do you personally take inspiration from?
I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. Simon Sinek has written a number of great books. I went to a full-day workshop that was at a sister company called Next Jump of Simon Sinek's here in New York last year, and it was mind-blowing. I'm a big fan of Malcolm Gladwell. I think that he's an amazing storyteller, and I think that storytelling is and it's really the business that I'm in, right? So I tell stories for a living, but I also tell them on behalf of clients. I'm hired to figure out what that great story is to tell to my clients' customers so that they buy from them. And so I take a lot of inspiration from who the great orators and storytellers are. Regardless of how you feel politically, I think Obama is an amazing orator. He's a great storyteller. So there are several, and for every one of these, for every single person I just named, I've probably watched at least one of their talks 5 to 10 times, at least. And it's but by watching it several more times, by watching the same talk over and over again, you pick up all these little nuances. You pick up what they do with their hands. You pick up the pauses that they make. You pick up what they do with their face, and they just have a commanding presence. And I think that I was reading about Gladwell just a few days ago, and if you watch Gladwell's TED Talks on spaghetti sauce, spaghetti sauce, I'm not interested in spaghetti sauce. I don't care. I've never wondered to myself, I wonder what the history of spaghetti sauce is. That has never crossed my mind. But I have watched the Malcolm Gladwell talk about spaghetti sauce probably 10 times, 15 times. And it's because, there's this incredible ability. Like, I would watch Malcolm Gladwell talk about paint, right? I would watch him talk about the day that he painted his room. And I just think there's this incredible kind of aura that comes from that. Well, having watched that many times, I thought, how did he do that? There's this belief of, well, he must be a natural. But if you actually dive in and if you look at interviews with Gladwell, and I read a couple of days ago, if you read them, what you realize is that Gladwell not only writes every word of his speeches, he writes every single word. He also notes when the mannerisms are going to be. So he notes 4-second pause. So he's following a script, and it's less of a presentation, and it's more of it's a performance. It's like you're here to be, this is a performance, much like a ballet or theater. And so that really had an impact on me. I was like, wow, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And I see that as kind of the next evolution in what I do as well, hopefully.
Those were great insights. And even if people who don't believe in scripting, watching and rewatching and watching again and watching again is like our human way of learning.
Absolutely.
We are a little bit like monkeys, right? Like, so we do have the capability of modeling, and that's how we have learned the most important skills that we have, right? By actually watching other people. So that's a great thing to do, and I love the thing of watching the same one again and again. Not so much for content, but for how it's delivered. Like, that was a really great tip. I cannot finish this interview without talking about branding and storytelling. What would you like to leave us with when it comes to telling the story of your brand?
When it comes to telling the story of my brand as an individual?
Or your brand as a company?
So I think that brands, Richard Branson talks about this, that what a brand really is at its core is a promise between two entities. And when I give talks about branding, this is what I start with. So Branson writes, and this is a long quote, but Branson writes that a brand is a promise. A brand is not a logo. A brand is not your tagline. It's not the brand colors. It's not how good your style guide is. It's not what people think of your website. Those things are not the brand. Those are artifacts almost of a brand. And what a brand really is a promise between the company or the nonprofit or the government institution or a group of individuals or a church, and then the people and the entities that group serves. And I very much believe that. So I believe that when we talk about personal brand, too often we talk about what the kind of tangibles are. So what's the logo? We spend so much time talking about the logo, but there's not enough time talking about how do we, it's not even so much how do we want people to feel. It's how do we want people to trust us? In what ways is there this level of trust? And that kind of idea of a commitment or a promise is something that really resonates with me. So when I make promises as an individual, when I make deadlines, when we make milestone commitments, when I tell you I'll send that over to you by the end of the week, those things are all micro commitments. And that is a much greater reflection on my brand as an individual or on the firm's brand as Blackstone than any logo would ever be. And there are many examples of people and companies with terrible traditional kind of branding, Craigslist being one, right? Craigslist has never, ever won a design award, a branding award, a user experience award. They don't win awards in that way, but still one of the top 15 websites in the U.S. And why is that? And it's because their brand is much bigger than the tangibles, than the website, than the logo, than any of those things. Their brand is about connecting people. And it just works. When you use it, it works. And so when I think of my brand as an individual, as Taylor, or as a speaker, if I'm speaking in front of a group of entrepreneurs, why are they there, right? And I oftentimes start talks by asking that. So I'll get there early and I'll kind of wander around the room and I'll say, what attracted you to this talk today? Because oftentimes I'm at a conference where they could see 10 other talks at that time. So why are you here? And then that's important for me to hear, because I want to make sure that I fulfill and that I uphold my end of the bargain. There was something that attracted you here, and it's important for me to maintain that, or to kind of complete that commitment. And to me, that is what a brand really is. And that's something that I work on often. It's something that I think about often as an individual, and it's something that I think about often as part of the company, and it's something that I push so hard to be part of kind of the ethos of the company as well.
That was like a great way to get starting thinking about brands and the stories we tell. Thank you for that. How can people find out more about Blackstone and the good work that you do?
You can go to our website, blackstonemedia.com. You can reach me on Twitter. It's first initial, last name. So Trusty, TTRUSTY. Always available and interested in meeting smart people.
And that was a smart note to complete our interview today. Till next time, remember that your awesomeness is portable. You can take it with you anywhere.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.